My name is Andrew Perlott. Welcome to Socratic State of Mind. So I just want to say before we begin that in this podcast, voiceover, whatever, I'm reading from an article in which I make claims supported by citations to scientific articles. I'm not going to read out each one of those or let you know when I'm citing something, but those citations are in the original article along with some charts that provide the data in a more accessible way. So if you actually want to know where the claims I'm making are coming from, you can go and read the original article. The link is in the podcast notes. Can we be slim if obesity isn't bad? You can't fight obesity without this question. I've got a question for you. Does anything matter? Weird question, I know, but I suspect it has some predictive qualities. For over a decade, I worked with clients trying to lose weight, and I was pretty good at it. The pounds fell off and health problems receded, but adherence was often the problem I struggled against. It sometimes felt like I was ramming my head against an immovable wall. Clients said they weren't very hungry and had little to no food cravings and were happy with their weight loss, but they still often went back to the foods that made them sick and fat. Through much experimentation, I found this question helped me predict who would relapse and who needed me to focus on their psychology and thought process. You might think this is an inane, nihilistic-sounding question. Of course, some things matter, Andrew. All your clients would say yes, but this isn't a question you ask directly, but rather probe obliquely. When you get into the habit, you'll find many people think and live and eat like their choices aren't particularly important beyond the usual sacred cows like be nice, don't kill, or steal, etc. Yes, some people morally idolize healthy foods, but still get seduced by pizza and Twinkies. But that's not most people. Most people aren't having their noble dietary beliefs subverted by French fry ads. Most people have few dietary standards beyond what's pleasing and utilitarian. Sure, they'd prefer to be lean rather than obese and healthy rather than sick, but failing to live and eat in ways producing those ends doesn't seem shameful, immoral, or objectively bad to them. So it's worth asking, what if people did believe eating well mattered in a big picture moral sort of way? What outcomes might we expect? Slim Christians. Why don't Catholic priests talk about food? I grew up going to Mass every week, but it didn't occur to me till my 20s that what was preached from the pulpit was just a smattering of the lessons one could take from the Bible. The priests never spoke of gluttony, for instance, despite it being one of the so-called 7 deadly sins. In fact, there was almost no talk of bodily discipline, health, or diet, even though priests can turn to Corinthians 9:27 and read, quote, "But I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others I myself should be disqualified," unquote. Half the priests had big guts swaying under their robes, so perhaps fear of hypocrisy is explanation enough. But what if Christians did emphasize the healthy eating messages they could find in the Bible? How might it affect their outcomes? Turns out some Christians do emphasize food and health, and it matters a lot. The Seventh-day Adventist co-founder Ellen G. White laid the moral implications of diet and lifestyle on thick. Quote, "Health should be as sacredly guarded as the character, for God requires of us the highest improvement of the body as well as the mind and soul." That's from Testimonies for the Church. And, quote, "Those who transgress the laws of God in their physical organism will be inclined to violate the law of God spoken from Sinai." That's her book, Counsels on Health. So, shitty diets and lifestyles equal bad. Got it. As a result, many Adventists are vegetarians or semi-vegetarians, and even the omnivores smoke and drink less, eat more fruits and vegetables, and move more. And the result? Average white Adventist men lived 7.28 years longer than average white Californian men in a study of 34,000 Adventists. The women lived 4.4 years longer. Adventist vegetarian men and women lived 9.5 and 6.1 years longer, respectively. Statistics for minorities weren't collected. So, wow, that's a lot of extra years. And how fat are the Adventists? A meta-analysis looking at BMI for various faiths found, quote, the closest to a consistent finding observed among these studies was the lower body weights of the Seventh-day Adventists compared with non-Seventh-day Adventists, unquote. So, out of many faiths surveyed, the one that cast the strongest moral aspersions on members' diet and lifestyle choices was the consistently slimmer one. In an ongoing study of 73,000 Adventists, including omnivores, vegans, and various kinds of vegetarians, the BMI of vegans was 23, lacto-ovo-vegetarians 25, pesco-vegetarians 26, semi-vegetarians 27, and non-vegetarians 28. The mean American BMI is now 29, or 1 point away from obesity. And in a world where most people get fatter as they age, the BMI of a group of Australian Adventists was incredibly, almost completely static between 1976 and 2006, while they're pure Australians packed on the pounds. And what about minorities prone to obesity? The mean American Hispanic had a BMI of 29.5, or just under obese, but the Hispanics in the Adventist Church, those that were vegetarian or vegan, had a BMI of 24.5, the non-vegetarians 27, so all of them significantly better than the regular American Hispanics of whatever persuasion. Is this a dead end? So you might be thinking, so what? Isn't this a worthless insight even if it's true? You can't force people to develop religious devotion and judge their diet choices. People are either dietary nihilists or they're not. Those Adventists also belong to church communities where their health values are reinforced, and most Americans don't have that. They're drifting in a sea of dietary hedonism. And it would be really hard to test the validity of the insight, since while researchers might randomize people into a particular diet, they can't randomize them into a faith or belief. Another fair objection is that this sort of moral certainty might not be good. If I believed that cake was not only bad for me specifically in the circumstances I'm in now, but that all cakes are bad for everyone all the time, I might back myself into a corner and start making mistakes. Dogmatic certainty is behind much of the world's stupidity. But I'm not so certain we can just throw out this insight. I think it actually has some power. And that's what I'll be exploring next.